I'm pregnant. Since you couldn't get pregnant, I went ahead and carried your husband's child instead. So that's how it is. You're of no use anymore. Just sign the divorce papers and get out. That's how I found out about my husband's affair with my sister. When my sister suddenly demanded I leave because of her pregnancy, I asked for a little time and agreed to do as she wished. They reluctantly agreed. My best friend came to pick me up as I was leaving, and my sister and husband were shocked, their faces turning bright red. My husband was already making googly eyes, wondering if such a beauty could really exist in this world. My sister was even more fixated on my best friend than my husband was. Ignoring those two, my best friend urged me to get in the car. As we were about to leave, my sister approached my friend with a lovesick expression. Somehow, this resulted in my husband turning pale and begging my friend for forgiveness. I have a beautiful older sister. Our mom's a looker too, and my sister inherited all her best features. I didn't take after mom at all, my face is more on the masculine side. Thick eyebrows, sharp features, prominent cheekbones. My sister would mock me, calling me things like man-woman and failed female. Even when our parents bought me girly clothes, she'd be mean and say they didn't suit my manly face. She'd deliberately dirty or hide the clothes. But in front of our folks, she'd act like a caring big sis, so they never knew the truth. If you tattle to mom and dad, I'll do even worse things to you. She'd threaten me, so I couldn't tell our parents. Despite all that, my sister had her own aspirations. She wanted to be a model. She'd spare no effort to become her dream model, always studying up on fashion. I wasn't interested in modeling or fashion at all. Sure, I could appreciate cute styles, but I never felt like trying them myself. As long as my clothes didn't offend anyone and looked clean, I was good. I went to the local high school, commuting from home. But for college, the program I wanted wasn't available locally, so I chose an out-of-state school. I started living on my own when I went to college. The university was near a famous tourist spot, so I rented a place nearby for an easy commute. I was the only one from my high school going there. With no familiar faces around, I was worried about being alone. But thanks to that, I met my best friend for life. After graduating, instead of moving back home, I got a job at a company near the university. Since my place was for students only, I had to move out after graduation. Luckily, there was a dorm for single employees, so I moved in there. 3 years into the job, just as I was thinking about moving out of the dorm and renting a place, my boyfriend proposed. I couldn't imagine marrying anyone else, so I accepted. We had some time before the wedding, but since my husband's lease was almost up, we decided to start living together right away. I took my husband to meet my parents, and they were thrilled. But my sister wasn't there. Apparently, she was unhappy about my marriage and had suddenly left that morning claiming she had urgent business, even though she knew we were coming. Not knowing about our bad relationship, my parents promised to bring her to the wedding no matter what. We both had jobs and agreed to keep working after marriage. The wedding was supposed to be later due to our work schedules. But luckily, there was a cancellation, and it coincided with a temporary break in a project at my husband's company. We couldn't let this chance slip by, so we rushed to prepare for the wedding and the big day arrived. Before the ceremony, my parents and sister came to the bride's room, so I called my husband over. That's when my sister and husband met for the first time. My husband was captivated by my sister, who showed up in an outfit that outshone the bride, and he couldn't take his eyes off her the whole time. My husband had been serious and focused solely on studying to get into his dream college. His parents had strict rules too, like no dating until he got into the university he wanted. Once in college, he said he was so busy keeping up with his studies that he had no time for fun. He claimed I was the first person he'd ever liked or dated. I didn't have much experience with men either, and my husband was actually the first one I'd been intimate with. I tried to tell myself that we were both just so inexperienced with the opposite sex that he couldn't help but be dazzled by my beautiful sister. My best friend couldn't make it to the wedding due to unavoidable circumstances. Since we'd moved up the date suddenly, I told my disappointed friend I'd send a video later. I comforted her, saying it wasn't her fault, and she'd already given us an early wedding gift. After the wedding, when we got back to our normal lives, my husband acted like nothing had happened with my sister. We were supposed to go on a honeymoon, but we couldn't take such a long vacation, so we postponed it as originally planned. 6 months after the wedding, my husband suddenly said he wanted to change jobs and quit his company without consulting me. I wished he'd at least waited until he had a new job lined up. Now I had to support us both on my own until he found a new job. My company isn't as big as where my husband worked. It'd be fine for a one-person place, but the rent for our current place is pretty steep. With just my salary, we'd have to budget really carefully to make it last. I explained this to my husband and said if his job search dragged on, he might need to pick up some part-time work, or we'd be in trouble. He apologized for causing me trouble but asked me not to tell his parents until he found a new job. That was fine, but the timing was bad. We'd been married 6 months with no signs of pregnancy, and my in-laws were getting impatient. Where's our grandchild? We want to see our grandchild's face. They'd bring it up every chance they got. And they'd decided it was 100% my fault we weren't pregnant. They blamed me for working despite being a woman. I told my husband all this too. We probably couldn't keep it from his parents for long. In response, he said he didn't plan on having kids until our finances were stable. I asked him to explain that to his parents if that's how he felt, but he refused, saying they'd demand to know why we were struggling financially after going to college and getting good jobs. I told him pretty harshly that he was being selfish, but he wouldn't budge. 2 months passed with my in-laws constantly nagging about grandkids and my husband saying he was close to landing a job. "You infertile wife! If we don't get grandkids, it'll be all your fault." My in-laws finally lost patience and decided I must be infertile. Truth is, we hadn't been intimate since the day my husband quit his job without warning. He said it'd be trouble for me if I got pregnant by accident, and now we even sleep in separate rooms. I often thought about telling his parents that he was the one avoiding trying for a baby. But every time, I'd cover for him because he'd asked me not to say anything until he found a new job. Just quit your job and focus on getting your body ready for pregnancy. A woman's value is in having children. They acted like it was evil for a woman to work outside the home. They also said I should be more seductive and pursue my husband. This tirade came after they'd snooped through my personal things while we were out. My husband had given them a spare key without asking me. I was already sick of my in-laws' visits, but soon after we got married, my sister started finding excuses to crash at our place all the time. It's awesome having a free place to stay so close to the tourist spots. My sister says she's here for sightseeing, but that's probably just an excuse. When my husband's home, she doesn't go out at all, not even for tourism. My husband dotes on her, waiting on her hand and foot with a lovesick expression. It's helpful that he deals with my sister, who I don't get along with, but seeing his puppy dog eyes irritated and bothers me. Whether I handle my sister myself or let my husband do it, I can't seem to find peace of mind. During one of my sister's umpteenth trips where she was mooching off us, something changed. My sister acted like a guest and didn't lift a finger, but my husband started comparing us and putting me down at every turn. A guy with a beauty like your sister doing housework every day is one lucky fella. In my case, I'm stuck with a caterpillar-browed woman. I wish you'd learn some beauty tips from your sister. Oh, you're so sweet. If you'd like, I could whip up a meal anytime. I've never seen my sister do housework. Then again, I don't know what happened after I moved out, so maybe she learned to help mom. We can't ask a guest to do that. Hey, don't just stand there, show your sister some hospitality. My husband's all sweet to my sister but harsh with me. After blowing past his promise to find a new job within a month, my husband finally landed one after 4 months. My relief was short-lived. He stopped contributing to our household and started blowing all his paycheck. We managed on just your salary for 4 months, so I'm gonna use the money I earn however I want. I was confused, but when he didn't chip in the next month or the one after, I had no choice but to keep supporting us on my own. Meanwhile, our savings were drying up, and we had to start cutting back. But my husband refused to lower his standard of living and wouldn't cooperate with saving money. That meant I had to work even more. Since side jobs were allowed, I started working weekends at a grocery store. My husband stopped helping with chores too, so I had to handle everything, housework and living expenses, by myself. I told myself I had to cut back on sleep, eat less, and make every effort possible. Even then, by the end of the month, I struggled to buy ingredients for dinners that would satisfy my husband. I blamed myself, thinking I just wasn't trying hard enough, and pushed myself even harder. As a result, I collapsed at work. I tried to refuse going to the hospital because it had cost money, but my boss wouldn't let me. He asked seriously if we were really so broke that we couldn't afford medical care on 2 incomes. I didn't want to admit the embarrassing truth, so I thought I could just skip a few meals. But when my boss took me to the hospital, the doctor said I was suffering from overwork and malnutrition. My boss was shocked and sent me home for the day, telling me not to come back until I got better. I knew he meant well, but if I didn't work, I couldn't keep my husband happy. What should I do? After some hesitation, I decided to talk to my best friend. Despite being super busy, my friend made time for me and listened with genuine concern. She stayed quiet until I finished telling her everything. When I was done, the first thing she said was that I didn't need to put up with any of this. She said I hadn't done anything wrong, and that married couples should be equals. My friend said that before we could find a solution, I needed to decide what I wanted. Did I want to stay married or get divorced? I had a job and could support myself decently if I was on my own. To get out of our financial troubles, my husband just needed to contribute even a part of his earnings to our living expenses. But if he wouldn't do that, divorce seemed like the only option. I told my friend I'd think about it some more with divorce as a possibility, and she said she'd be there to talk anytime. I waited for my husband to come home and asked if he could please contribute even a little to our living expenses. But he wouldn't budge. He said how he used his money was none of my business. When I asked what he was spending it on, he suddenly got angry. If he had nothing to hide, he should have been able to tell me, so his anger made me suspicious. I decided to investigate where his money was going. My husband uses cashless payments for almost everything. While he was in the bathroom, I quickly checked his phone. He was still using the same e-money app, set to auto-charge. His wallet only had a few bucks in cash and 1 credit card. The credit card statement was viewable online. I tried some likely passwords but couldn't get in, so I gave up before it locked me out. The next day, I called the card company and had them mail me a paper statement. The card purchases were things like expensive jewelry and hotel stays for trips. I hadn't been on a single trip since we got married. He kept saying someday, but we never even went on our honeymoon. After a few days of digging into his spending, it became clear he was probably supporting someone. He was regularly buying jewelry and designer bags, but I'd never received any. So it was natural to think he was sending them to someone else. I didn't think my husband was splurging on bars and nightclubs. My husband's a lightweight who can't drink, so I doubt he'd make the mistake of buying expensive gifts while drunk. This was my husband deliberately giving gifts to someone. Who could it be? Just then, I got a message from my sister. I was surprised to see they were in direct contact, but I guess it could have been innocent communication between in-laws. But when I checked their past messages, I found exchanges about trips they'd taken together and photos. There was even a video of them fooling around in some hotel bed. I lost all respect for my husband and felt disgusted. I decided to divorce him and started preparing. In the midst of this, my in-laws showed up at our place without warning. My sister joined them a little later. What an unpleasant group. Once my sister sat down, my husband announced that everyone was here and we could get to the main topic. Your sister is pregnant. For a split second, I almost asked what. But since I already knew about my husband and sister's relationship, I figured this kind of thing could happen and kept my cool. It's better not to lose your temper and get emotional in situations like this. I decided to record the conversation on my phone in my pocket. My sister looked down at me with a triumphant expression. I got pregnant for you since you're infertile. You should be grateful. And as a token of that gratitude, my sister said I should hand over my position as the legal wife. I want to cherish the woman who's having my child the most. You couldn't even fulfill your duty as a wife and embarrassed me, so you need to leave. My husband was the one who said we wouldn't have kids until our finances were stable. Why was he pushing all the blame onto me? My in-laws seemed to know about my sister's pregnancy and my husband's affair too, and they were completely on their side. You're sisters, but your personalities are so different. You really should learn from your big sister. The thought of taking her as a role model made me shudder. She's so inappropriate, it's obvious she'll end up with nothing but enemies around her. It was infuriating that they were all ganging up to kick me out, but looking at it another way, this could actually work in my favor. I felt things might go smoother if I brought up the divorce myself. So I should divorce my husband, right? My husband seemed surprised that I agreed without resistance, but his expression quickly returned to normal. So I can move in starting today, right? Hold on. I need some time to sort through my stuff and figure out where I'm gonna live. Your stuff's probably just junk anyway. A day should be plenty. My sister said she'd put up with it, acting like she had a personal maid for the day, and ended up staying from that day on. We were already sleeping in separate rooms, so it didn't really matter. After my in-laws left, I rushed to get ready to leave the house. During this process, I contacted my best friend. I wanted to tell her the divorce was settled and ask if she knew of any good short-term rentals. Concerned about me, my friend wanted to talk in person and came to pick me up in a luxury car. My best friend, who couldn't make it to my wedding, was meeting my husband and sister for the first time. I'd only mentioned my friend's name in conversation with my husband when things were still good between us. My sister got weirdly flustered when she saw my best friend. Hey, how come a plain Jane like you is buddies with my favorite model? Is this to spite me? How much did you pay her? My friend used to be a model at one point. Now she's an entrepreneur and has retired from modeling. I knew to some extent that my friend was a fashion icon with devoted fans who still idolize her. The clothes she wore were popular, and people wanting to dress and do their makeup like her became such a trend that it spawned slang terms. But when she suddenly retired at the height of her popularity, the media went wild with speculation for days. Come to think of it, I remember my sister being obsessed with a model she really looked up to. She'd mock my fashion sense, saying I should be more embarrassed to walk around naked, and that I should follow her favorite model's example. I vaguely recall my sister spending so much money on this obsession that our parents scolded her several times. My friend and I met in college. Some fans even enrolled just to follow her, so there were always fans around her. It became an issue on campus when some overzealous students caused trouble. For students who weren't interested, my friend's presence was just a nuisance, and there were conflicts with her fans. Because of her modeling activities, outsiders would come onto campus, and my friend gradually became isolated. Apparently, she was fed up with people who had ulterior motives or were only interested in her as a model. That's when I happened to talk to her, and our relationship deepened. My friend sometimes missed protests because she didn't want to trouble other students. I remember approaching her when she was being called out by professors. If you'd like, want to work on the professor's assignment together? I can lend you notes from the lectures you missed. I think that's roughly how I approached her. At the time, my friend said with a very suspicious look, "Are you trying to get close to me as a model too, hoping to gain something?" I had been watching my friend for a while. People were making such a fuss over things she didn't intend, and I couldn't understand why she had to give up on her duties as a student because of it. At first, my friend didn't trust me, but gradually she opened up to me, and our relationship has continued to this day. That's why I absolutely couldn't forgive my sister for saying I'd bought my friend's position with money. Don't be ridiculous. I'd never buy a dear friend with money. Don't look at my friend that way. It's disrespectful. You subhuman trash, you dare lecture me? Wait, my favorite model is right in front of me. This is so lucky. The more my sister looked at my friend, the more excited she got about having her longtime idol right there. With a lovesick expression and blushing face, she begged my friend, "Please, can I have a picture with you?" She bombarded her with questions about fashion tips and whether it was still possible to become a model. But my friend cut her down cold. "I don't know anyone who'd treat my dear friend like trash and make her sad by kicking her out of her home. I don't want to think such a person could be among my fans." She then glanced at my sister's fashion and called it a tasteless, unfashionable outfit without a shred of individuality. My sister, who'd been confident in her fashion sense, crumbled after being criticized by her idol. My husband didn't comfort my sister at all, instead gawking at my super beautiful friend, the charismatic ex-model. It seemed like he thought my sister was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, but now he realized there were even more stunning women out there. "Hey, if you had such a gorgeous friend, you should have introduced us earlier. I wouldn't have messed things up with your sister." I felt disgusted by his comment, which sounded like he would have cheated with my friend if I'd introduced them sooner. My friend furrowed her brow and looked at my husband like he was some kind of creep. Then my friend revealed her true identity to my husband. "I'm very close with your wife. I'm the daughter of the CEO of the company you work for." My friend harshly criticized my husband, asking if he was hitting on the CEO's daughter. My husband turned pale when he realized he'd been eyeing the CEO's daughter as a sexual object. He frantically tried to backpedal, saying that wasn't his intention and begging to keep this between us. I shook off my husband's hand and declared that I'd agree to the divorce, but I'd definitely be going through division of property. Ignoring my husband's protests, I grabbed my packed bags and got into my friend's car. It was decided that I'd stay at my friend's place for now. She said I could use her spare room as I liked. But I don't want to impose myself forever, so I'm planning to find my own place as soon as possible. That evening, I told my parents everything. They had no idea my sister had done such a thing and were so shocked they couldn't speak at first. When they finally found their words, they assured me they'd always be on my side. However, like most ordinary people, I don't have connections to legal help. I searched online for lawyers but didn't know who to choose. Then my friend introduced me to a law firm she works with. The lawyer is very compassionate and truly reliable, empathizing deeply with my situation. Grateful for my friend's connections, I officially demanded alimony from my husband and sister through the lawyer. I left the negotiations to the lawyer, but from the reports, I could tell my sister and husband were being quite aggressive. However, they suddenly became more conciliatory at some point. Apparently, my husband had been confidently negotiating based on advice from my sister, thinking they could win. My sister had told my husband, "Our parents raised me with lots of love and affection. That hasn't changed, they still care about me. They're not the kind of parents who'd stop supporting me even if I took my sister's husband. They'll take my side and help me out." My husband blindly believed what my sister said without checking and approached the negotiations with the lawyer confidently. However, our parents, who had already heard the truth from me, not only refused my sister's request for help but declared they were cutting ties with her. In the process, my sister learned the truth. Our parents were both divorced and had remarried, each bringing their own child. I'm my dad's child from his previous marriage, and my sister is my mom's. My dad's first wife, my birth mother, had passed away. Our parents revealed this to me when I decided to get married. We promised not to tell my sister, so she didn't know until our parents told her. They had planned to tell her when she got married, but she stole my husband in a homewrecker marriage and didn't even tell our parents before the wedding. So our parents had lost the timing to reveal it. The main reason our parents were furious and cut ties with my sister had to do with the reason for my mom's divorce. My mom had a tough time due to her ex-husband's cheating. He was apparently a real ladies' man, and she found out when she was pregnant with my sister. He ditched her when her belly started showing, saying she looked unsightly. Then he ran off with another woman. Mom struggled to give birth to and raise my sister. That's why she can't forgive cheaters, no matter what. My dad witnessed all this. The company he worked for hired my mom when she was looking for a job with a baby in her arms. Dad saw up close how a woman could be jerked around and abandoned by a selfish man. When he found out his own daughter was going through the same thing, he couldn't forgive my sister. But it's also true that he raised my mom's child as his own after they went through thick and thin together. Thinking of how hard my mom worked to raise us, he couldn't bring himself to speak his true feelings. But Mom was even more furious than Dad. She was the first to decide to cut ties, saying, "That girl isn't my daughter anymore." With things going this way, there was no way they'd help my sister, so our parents cut her off. When my sister realized she couldn't get help from our parents, she came to me for support. My ex-husband asked if I had any compassion for my pregnant sister who got pregnant in my place, and told me to show gratitude. He threatened that withdrawing the claim would be the best way to show sincerity. But this move only backed my sister and ex-husband further into a corner. The lawyer said it was an act of intimidation against me. When I said I was gonna file a police report, their attitude suddenly changed. In the end, we agreed that they'd go through the process in exchange for me not filing a police report, and we'd pretend their threats never happened. Just when I thought I could move on with my life, my ex-husband kept calling persistently. I picked up the phone, planning to tell him I'd file a stalking report if he kept this up, but his anguished voice hit my ears. First off, my sister's pregnancy was a lie they'd cooked up together. My sister wanted to kick me out and take my place as his wife. My ex thought he could get my in-laws, who didn't like me much, on his side. Remembering how my in-laws had been pressuring me about grandkids, he figured they'd be thrilled to kick me out if they thought my sister was pregnant. They planned to really try for a baby after getting rid of me, and if it got too hard to fool the in-laws, they'd just say the baby died in the womb. As I listened, I was amazed at how childish and half-baked their plan was. I didn't want to waste time on my ex's story and told him I was gonna hang up, but he begged me to listen in a desperate voice. Figuring he'd just keep calling if I hung up, I put the phone on speaker and left it. I felt like, whatever, just talk to yourself. I half-listened while doing other things. Basically, my ex-husband's rambling boiled down to this. Once he started living with my sister, their standard of living dropped because I, who had been supporting our lifestyle, was gone. To maintain their lifestyle, almost all of my ex's income would go to living expenses, so my sister couldn't live as luxuriously as before. My ex-husband had no clue about the monthly automatic payments for utilities, rent, and maintenance fees. He was shocked at how much it all cost. They quickly started living paycheck to paycheck. There was no help from my sister's family as expected, and the in-laws refused to help, saying there's no way they should struggle just because the wife changed. The in-laws thought we had enough financial wiggle room for my ex to cheat, even living on just his income. It was too late to tell them that I'd been paying the living expenses. My sister started treating my ex harshly, complaining this wasn't what she signed up for and upset she couldn't live luxuriously. She had planned to supplement their living expenses with help from her family and use my ex's income for luxuries. Plus, my sister had quit her job when they got married. The in-laws advised her not to work while pregnant, so she'd already quit. When my ex asked her to at least get a part-time job since she wasn't really pregnant, she apparently flew into a rage and broke some furniture. By the way, my sister doesn't do any housework, and my ex isn't good at it either, so their place is a total mess. At his wit's end with my sister, my ex reached out to me for help. He started saying he finally understood how valuable I was, obviously not meaning a word of it. He even had the nerve to ask for a reconciliation, saying we should try again. You gotta be kidding me. You just wanna use me as a wallet, right? There's no way we're getting back together. When I shot him down, he then asked me to introduce him to my beautiful friend. You want me to introduce you to the CEO's daughter at your company? Are you crazy? Your ulterior motives are so obvious. You're gonna lose your job too, you know? As I was saying this to my ex, I suddenly remembered something. Wait a sec, didn't the company have something to say to you? You've got some nerve asking me to introduce my friend after that. There's a limit to how thick-skinned you can be. My ex didn't seem to know what I was talking about. He kept asking me what I meant, but I hung up without answering. After a while, the in-laws got suspicious when my sister's body shape didn't change, and the lie the two of them had cooked up was exposed. The in-laws, who had been doting on my sister out of desire for grandchildren, did a complete 180. They cursed her as a liar, raging about how she'd tricked old folks for her own amusement. They called my sister, who couldn't do housework, a failed woman, and said that even beauty is just dead weight if she's useless. My sister, who'd been forgiven for everything just for being pretty, now found herself on the receiving end of the same words she used to look down on me with. Hearing all the harsh words she used to dish out, my sister became very quiet. She didn't seem to have the vocabulary to respond to the verbal abuse thrown back at her. Under the in-laws' supervision, my sister was forced to try for a baby with my ex on her ovulation days, but there were no signs of pregnancy. The in-laws decided my sister must be infertile, but she strongly objected to this. The couple got fertility tests, which showed my sister was fine, but my ex had problems and was actually infertile. When the in-laws, who had been desperately wanting grandchildren, learned their beloved son was the problem, they aged rapidly and suddenly started showing signs of dementia from the shock. My ex, now having to care for two elderly people at once, was hit with even more misfortune. He was suddenly transferred to a dead-end position. It was a pretty unusual move, not being the regular season for transfers. Typically, an unusual transfer like this is either a reward for good performance or punishment for a major screw-up. But my ex wasn't in a position to be held responsible for anything, nor had he contributed enough to the company to be rewarded for good performance. So people started speculating that he must have personally pissed off the higher-ups. The rumors varied. Some said he'd been selling company property, others that he'd used a company car for an affair trip. The fact that he'd had an affair seemed to be true, and that part of the rumor started spreading. My friend, the CEO's daughter, apparently pulled some strings at my ex's company. Actually, I'd heard from my friend beforehand that the company had decided on how to deal with my ex. My ex's income decreased, and he was treated like dead weight at work, making him feel uncomfortable. But he couldn't quit his job. He needed money for his parents' care expenses. My sister, who'd been told she didn't need to work as a beautiful pregnant wife, was now being told to earn money by the in-laws once they found out the pregnancy was a lie. My sister confidently sent her resume to modeling agencies, thinking her beauty would make her a quick fortune and she'd be a hit as a beautiful mature woman. But she didn't even get a nibble. She ended up starting as a cashier at a local supermarket, but her haughty personality caused problems and she couldn't keep the job long. Then, an entertainment agency agreed to hire my sister. She started the job full of enthusiasm, but it turned out to be shady work, and she became known for some questionable activities. Rowdy, sketchy guys started showing up at their home. The neighbors started whispering about her being a loose woman. Finally realizing she'd gotten into something terrible, she seems to have had a change of heart and decided to work honestly. But once you get a bad reputation, it's hard to shake, and she's struggling. My sister can't afford beauty treatments anymore, and there's hardly a trace left of her former beauty. My ex is worn out, struggling with workplace relationships and run ragged caring for his parents. My friendship with my bestie is still going strong. I'm sure it'll last forever. I thought I was done with marriage, but after requesting a transfer to another branch, I met someone. He was also divorced and had been jerked around by a cheating wife. At first, we both said we got along but were done with marriage. But gradually we realized we couldn't be without each other and decided to get married. A while after remarrying, I found out I was pregnant. When I told my best friend, she also announced she was pregnant. My best friend and I got pregnant at the same time and gave birth at the same time. From now on, our families are gonna be close for a long time. Our husbands seem to have hit it off too, and we laugh, hoping our kids will become good friends. We're planning to introduce them to our parents soon. Although I don't get to see my best friend and parents as often since transferring, I actually feel closer to them now than ever before.